Hi, my name is Oliver Cox. I'm the founder and CEO of HSM. This is the second video in our series on our values, and the value that I'm going to discuss today is freedom. And right off the bat, I want you to know that you're not to expect the formulaic, boring rehash of the common arguments about freedom of speech and freedom, and particularly not the sort of finger-pointing, saying, my perspective is correct and my policies are correct and yours is wrong, that one is treated to often, for instance, from Congress. Rather, I think, or I hope to present you with an approach to free speech that I think that most people of differing opinions can actually get on board with. And let me tell you all about it. I think that much of the problems with our discourse about free speech online, which is of course a big concern for us at HSM because we are essentially a free speech company. We deal with text, we deal with media, we deal with ideas and the connections between them and managing those things over the internet. But I think one of the biggest problems is that we try to map free speech norms from the real world onto the digital world. So discussing this from a US perspective, US First Amendment perspective, which I think is the most advanced, there are essentially three types of space in the real world with respect to the First Amendment and with respect to free speech. There's my property, for instance, my house. I necessarily have free speech there. Then we have somebody else's property, your property. Do I have, by law, free speech in somebody else's property? No. Somebody else is at liberty to eject me, for example, from their home if they don't like what I'm saying. It's their right. Now, of course, we have public. And in the USA, we, of course, have the quintessential free speech area, like the public square, like the public street. And, of course, these are understood to be places where free speech is accepted, it is expected, and where you can expect to engage in conversation and hear things that may be offensive to you. Now, what are the equivalent of these areas on the internet? Now, I think that the best way to think about this would be to simply ask the question, whose computer is it? So if it's my computer, I, of course, have the right to free speech on my machine, almost definitionally. What about on your computer? Do I have the right to speak my mind and say whatever I want on your computer? No, obviously not. Now, what goes here in the middle? In this area here that corresponds to the public square in the real world? Perhaps Twitter or YouTube, say? I say no. I say that there is no public square on the internet. And in fact, what can feel like the public square is merely somebody else's computer. You have to ask the question, who owns the computer, as I mentioned earlier? I can own it, or somebody else can own it. But there's no ownership structure of a machine that actually corresponds to it being the public square. Now, it doesn't mean that we can't get there. I'm not saying that necessarily we can't create a legal or social instrument that actually functions like the public square online. We just don't have it today. And I am curious, for example, about whether we could create something like this with distributed technology like distributed ledger or blockchain. But today, it doesn't exist. And these constructs, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, etc., I would say are pretended public squares. And they're obviously under considerable pressure, and I'm empathic about the pressure that they're under. But nonetheless, they are not public, and they often present themselves as the public street, the public square, which I think is a little problematic. So let's dig a little more into what these media are and how they're actually structured. So let's draw a simple diagram here. We've got our computer, of which, of course, the hard drive is the most important component in this instance because it's where the speech is actually stored. And we have our users, many, many, many of them. And they store their media on this computer that somebody else owns, and other users retrieve this speech, this media, from this central area here. Now, when you look at this model, centralized with the people interacting all with one computer here, what are the problems with this model? The first model is that it's a single point of failure. Excuse me. It's a single point of failure. I nearly wrote SOP down at work last week. We were talking a lot about standard operating procedures. But no, indeed, SPF, single point of failure. Were I a foreign government, say, and I wanted to shut down the speech of people that are criticizing me, it would be a gift to me if all that speech were on one platform, or were on few platforms, because I just need to go to those people, those organizations, and put pressure on them, and they can take that speech down. That's the first problem. The second problem is that this structure makes private companies into judges. Meaning that every day, if you host one of these media, you have to say who can speak on your medium, who is not allowed, and what speech is or isn't allowed. And in my view, a private company with a profit incentive, usually driven by advertising, is probably one of the worst organizations to make these kinds of decisions. And I'm not going to take any sides here, because that's really not what I want to do. And I'm not going to comment on what speech or types of speech I think is or is not appropriate or should not be online. I hope you can nonetheless agree with me that it causes friction, it causes problems, it causes misunderstandings when we have these private organizations that have to make these really big decisions about what is or is not acceptable. And then the final issue, and this doesn't really relate so much to free speech, but I'm bringing it up because it's very relevant, is the disappearance that happens with these platforms sometimes. There's a website, and I apologize, I can't remember the URL, but it's a graveyard, it tracks all of the media, networking, etc. companies that have disappeared. And typically when they disappear, they take their media with them. They take everything that people have put on them with them. And in that respect, it's almost part of the single point of failure dynamic, meaning that if you put your stuff with somebody else, they can disappear, they can go, and it's gone. And I think that's a big problem. So when we look at this centralized model with this pretended public square, what can we do differently in order to avoid these issues? Avoid it being a single point of failure, and avoid the wrong type of person or the wrong type of organization having to be the judge. Here's my model. So you have it such that every participant in your system has their own server. There's a one-to-one correspondence between people and servers. And I realize, before I continue, I should define what a server is. A server is a computer. And it's a specialized computer that is usually fast for certain narrow functions like delivering a web page. It's optimized for those types of things. It's always on. And there's usually some type of maintenance schedule. Because let's imagine, for example, that I just wanted, instead of using a server, I just wanted to use my computer. I could do that. It's relatively straightforward. But the problem is my computer would probably be too slow. I want to turn it off at night. And it's not, my computer doesn't typically get all of the updates, the security updates that it needs, the updates to the software it needs in order to be effective in delivering the content that people need. So instead of using just my computer, people typically use servers because they're optimized for these functions. So each user in my system, in our system, HSM, each user has its own server, has their own server. And the servers coordinate among themselves to distribute the content as needed. So for instance, let's say I publish some media, some text to Twitter. That's then stored on Twitter's servers, and when somebody else wants it, it's then delivered to them via their servers or some intermediaries. In our proposal here, the idea is that when I publish something, it's stored, this is me, it's stored on my server. And when other people want it, it's sent to their servers and then to them. So this means that there's no single point of failure. It's distributed. And there is no organization akin to Twitter, Facebook, to YouTube. None of these organizations need to exist. You can, of course, have aggregators, but none of those aggregators or people that bring voices together will necessarily be the king or the judge of this huge organization. Instead of being a big tree or a big hierarchy with one organization with all of this input and data within it, it's instead a network, maybe with different overlapping pieces of the network with different concerns, but it's distributed. And so, for instance, if, let's say, I behaved in a way that this network, let's call it network 1, let's say that these people disagreed with what I was saying. They could remove me from their network, boot me out, but my speech is still up. When you're thrown off Twitter, for instance, everything that you put there is gone, or it might still be on their servers, but it's inaccessible. Nobody can reach it. But because this entity here is mine, they can stop aggregating my stories, they can stop republishing my stuff in their world, but they don't silence me. And so for this reason, any organization in HSM that is tasked with aggregating, with bringing together voices, is not a judge, because nobody can silence you. Indeed, the only person that can silence you is the government, or you might indeed have problems with your hosting provider. Hosting provider being the organization that you pay to host your media and whom you essentially rent your server from. But it's important to note that those people are under a very different kind of pressure from the public to moderate or to suppress particular types of speech. And indeed, if you are a real dissident and you're having problems with your hosting company, and you're having problems with the government and all those kinds of things, even in this system, there are still ways for you to keep online. For instance, having your own server, buying it, putting it in your house and plugging it in. Whereas there's no way to do that in this system here. I can't host my own Twitter on my own server and be part of the Twitter universe. But in this system, that's how it's architected. You have your own thing, and you bring it to the table. You bring it to the Discord. You plug in, and you're cooking on gas. To summarize, let me just recap a few points. So number one, we have this problem of pretended public spaces. And these spaces cause problems because, as I mentioned earlier, they're a single point of failure, and they're judges when they shouldn't be. And the reason for that is how they're structured. It's because they're structured in this centralized manner. So we need to get rid of these. Well, we need to provide an alternative to these organizations. And my proposal is, instead of centralizing speech, is to distribute speech. And the advantage of this is that it's just putting your stuff on your computer. There are no legal changes necessary. There are no social changes necessary. We already know that you get to do what you want on your stuff. And the great thing is that it's fractal, meaning that you can form relationships, you can aggregate different people, you can join and leave different spaces easily without losing things, and you can have different rules in different spaces. So I might be part of one space that's a free-for-all, that's fine, and another space that's very strict. I can be part of both, and maybe if I'm outrageous, I get kicked out of one, but I don't get kicked out of the other. There's no pretended unitary thing that has one rule that causes all these problems. And of course, one should note here that there are examples of this online already, such as Mastodon. But the key difference between Mastodon and HSM, and my proposal, is that on Mastodon you still have large centralization of many, many people working on one person's server, and forgive me, I think I'm using the wrong terminology there, but it's still nonetheless distributed partly, relatively to Twitter, say, and I therefore commend them and their work. Now, I want to give you some names here, which I should have done earlier on, but there we are. Envoy is our name for our personal server. And all individuals that participate in the HSM system will need to have an Envoy. It's where your personal data is stored. It's where, encrypted of course, it's where your ideas are stored, your media are stored. This is the brand name for this construct, is Envoy. and the sum total of envoys participating together, storing and publishing media together, we call this the hypercosm. I'm excited about this idea because I think that it offers a way for us to get on the same page about how we manage speech online in a way that doesn't actually require anybody to change their opinion. Meaning, do you think that you have free speech on your computer? And do you think that you don't have free speech necessarily on somebody else's computer? If you agree with those ideas, we can set up this model where we have many people all participating, all with their own server, which is theirs, and wherein therefore they have free speech. We can build this world and stop having these circular discussions about platforms, about social media, about who speaks and who gets kicked off. So there we are. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen. If you have questions or feedback, please email me at oliver@hyperstructure.media. I look forward to hearing from you, and please stay tuned for our next video. Thank you.